Hi everyone, I'm Liz Henderson, Director of Edge Women, and I'm so excited you're tuning in tonight for Season 3 of Refuel and Recharge. Our hope is that these stories inspire you to make a difference right where you're at. Tonight's story is one I'm sure you can hope all wrapped up in one. Tonight you're going to hear from Chip and Jody Ferlaak. A story that no family would ever want to walk through has been one that provides inspiration. Before we get started though, I'm going to toss it over to Ann O'Brien, who will share a little bit about what Edge is.
Thanks, Liz. Everyone at Edge is so excited that you have joined us tonight for this event. And I'd like to take a moment to tell you a little bit about Edge and how you can get involved. Edge is a nonprofit organization that focuses on whole person development, which includes personal, professional, and spiritual growth. We're based in Indianapolis, but we have participants from all around the country. And we invite you to join us. There's several ways that you can join the Edge community. The first is Edge groups. We pair 5 to 7 young professionals with a more seasoned leader who serves as a mentor. And these groups meet every 2 weeks for a year and walk together personally, professionally, and spiritually. We also have Edge at Work, which takes Edge's proven mentoring model and brings it to the workplace. Companies select emerging leaders to participate in this cohort-based curriculum program for 12 months, where they focus strictly on personal and professional growth. We also invite you to join us for Edge events, which you already have tonight, and we have virtual events as well as in-person events. And we hope that you consider joining the Edge community, learning more at edgementoring.org.
Chip and Jody, it is so good to be with you today. We are grateful for your kindness and time and willingness to come to Indianapolis to film with Edge and share a little bit about your story. As you know, we are filming for our series called Refuel and Recharge, and it is featuring inspiring stories around the country. And I know I told you, Jody, but I was in bed reading one night at midnight. I was up with a crying baby. And I came across your story, and it was heartbreaking yet hopeful and inspiring, and it just captivated me. And I immediately knew that you guys were someone that needed to share your story. And after I saw that you were on Oprah too, I thought, oh my goodness, yes, of course, come to Edge. So thank you so much for your kindness in joining us.
We are excited to be here and share with everyone. Thank you.
Well, great. For those watching tonight, I want you to share a little bit about who you are. So who are Chip and Jody?
Well, I think, in many ways we are what our family is. We've been married 25 plus years, and we have 7 kids, 6 here on earth with us, 1 in heaven. And we have a crazy busy household, and being here is actually probably the most calm we've been in a while. But we have children ages 10 to 22, and they're all different, which a lot of people with kids can relate to.
And so you say you have 6 children here on earth and 1 in heaven. And the one that we're going to talk a little bit about today is Teagan. Tell us a little bit about who she was.
Teagan is still a very big part of our lives. She was our firstborn. And just to back up a little bit, when he was proposing to me, I made him promise we would never have kids. So when I found out I was expecting a baby on our first anniversary, my world was rocked in a big way because children were not going to be a part of my life plan and direction. But the moment she was placed in my arms, my world changed in the very best way. And you can just see, I think, even now, like talking about her and just who she was in our life was just light and joy. And I didn't know what to expect, and it just blew everything away. She was definitely a daddy's girl as well.
And I think she controlled she was one of the firstborn that controlled the household. Yeah. And so our son Brock, when he was born, took a lot of direction from her. She was the leader of the household. She controlled the mood of the household, and she was normally in a great mood and always outgoing and involving her brother in things in so many ways.
Wow. And so she would have been 24 this year. And so almost 20 years ago now, you walked through every family's worst nightmare.
We did.
So walk us through what happened that day.
Well, I think, one of the things that's kind of interesting is walking through the days leading up to it. Jody and the kids were back in Minnesota, and I picked them up 4 days beforehand. And in Minnesota, there was a wedding and I think 2 family reunions that she went to. So the kids saw everybody. And so I picked them up that Thursday. And then Friday at dinner, Teagan was praying to ask Jesus in her heart. And then asked her to be in Brother Brocky's heart. And she was so excited because she said she had Jesus in her heart. The next day, she was asking Jody how old she was. And Jody said, well, you're 4. And Teagan said, well, how many days is that? And Jody's like,
how many days am I? How many days am I? She repeated.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know, like you're doing dishes. I don't know how many days that is. So I just said, it's a lot of days and you have a lot left. She was pretty happy and content with that and just kind of went on her merry way. And I wouldn't have thought anything about it, except things are about to make a dramatic change in our life.
Yeah.
So that next morning, we went to Sunday service, and it was one of those days. Normally, I worked right away after Sunday services at the golf club, and it was one of those days where I didn't have to go until 2:30 in the afternoon. And so earlier in that week, I was at Chamber of Commerce function, and I had a piece of pie from the Old Depot restaurant in Johannesburg, a town of about 10 miles east of where we were at. So I suggested we go there for brunch.
And we were a family of 5. So it was kind of involved to go out. And Brock happened to be fussing in the car on the way out there. He's 2.5 at this point. But Teagan just kept kind of making it fun on the ride. And the third time he fussed, Chip said, I'm just going to turn the car around and we're just going to go home. And I said, we're now more than halfway and Teagan's being an angel. So I said, this brunch is going to go smooth. If we can handle Brock, if she was fussing, we would go home. But she was just literally an angel that day. She hadn't done one thing out of step, and getting up early for church and all that, it can be kind of crazy and hectic. And she was just, there was something different about her that day.
And so, we went in and we ordered our food, and, our recollections from after the food came are so different. I remember taking a bite of food and then thinking I was having a heart attack. And I felt like I was grabbing my chest, and I felt like I was sliding under the table. Wow. And when my eyes cleared, I'm in the grill of a car. Never been knocked out before, not realizing I'd probably been out for 15, 20 minutes. And I looked around and I saw Ron Karanka, a victim of the other family, slumped against the wall. I saw Wyndham in her car seat looking like she was sleeping. And that's all I knew. I remember trying to get my leg out from under the car, and then my leg went out from the car, but I couldn't get my other leg out from under the car. And they flipped the car, and I remember walking out because I wouldn't let anybody help me out. And I came out, and I saw Jody crying, and but at that point, I was grabbed by people and put down in a chair, and because I was busted up pretty good as well.
Wow. So what you didn't realize was that a car had just driven through the restaurant.
A car came up the front 2 stairs and through the front door, and we were the first table to take the impact of the wall in the vehicle. There were no windows, so we had no idea as we were about to take about our second bite of our meal that anything was remotely happening, around us. What I recall is I just heard a whoosh boom. It was just the loudest boom. And I thought what happened was an explosion. It felt like the floor had just exploded underneath me, and I was actually thrown in the air and I did a couple somersaults and landed on the floor where a table should have been. And there was no table, and as I looked over, here was a car right on top of where our table should be, and Teagan was laying next to it. And it's one of those moments where it's literally in slow motion, as they talk, or just like a movie or something's happening. And I think for at least a few seconds, it was like, okay, I'm going to wake up from this dream. Like what just happened, like how you would wake from a nightmare. And it didn't happen. And so I stood up and I was still like, I can move. I'm, clearly here. And I took 2 steps over and did what everybody is not supposed to do. And I scooped Teagan up. My mama's heart could not leave her laying on the floor. And also I think I had a sense that if it was an explosion, like we need to get out. So I just picked her up. And as I did, I could see her color was already turning blue. And she had quite a gash in the back of her head. And so I just stepped out, which there was a hole in the wall where the door should be, and took about 3 steps out, and I laid her down on the ground. And literally at that point, there was activity of people all over the place, and somebody was right kneeling next to her starting CPR. And so I turned like kind of making sense of what just happened. Like there is a car where everyone should be, but now where is everybody else? So I knew I had Chip to look for, and Brock, who was 2.5, and Wyndham, who happened to be that day still strapped in her car seat, which is something we had never done before because she was still very tiny. And so normally what you would do is wherever you go, you unstrap the car seat first, and then you carry the little car seat around. And I had just said to her, Wyndham, you're getting wiggly. I'm about to eat a bite, and I will get you out in just a moment. And whoosh, boom. So she was still strapped in her car seat, which saved her life. But it changed her life because she came through this incident. I call it an incident because the woman driving the car chose to drive into the restaurant. She claimed she was trying to kill herself and not hurt anybody else. But our whole family took the impact, as well as the family at the table next to us, a mother, father, and 2 children, and the mom was killed.
Wow.
So our lives shattered and turned upside down, and Wyndham was left with a traumatic brain injury and is 20 years old and has lived with that. And
Wow. So in the moments after this accident, they transport you all to the hospital. And now talk to me about your time in the hospital and then everything that followed, because you also had to, Teagan passed away, and you had to celebrate her life while you were also recovering.
Yes, so I was really incapacitated. I was in the ICU in the hospital, but I was fully awake and alert.
so all 4 of our family members were airlifted. I was actually treated and released, but spent about 7 weeks in a wheelchair with my injuries from the waist down. So they all went down to Flint Hurley Hospital, and we spent about 3.5 weeks in the ICU.
And Jody, in many ways, was running things there. Kind of some seminal moments for me, at least. Because again, our experiences are so different because of what we went through in there. The next day, it was fairly clear there was no brain activity, and so it was an easy decision to say, let the transplant team come.
Wow.
We actually were rushing to sign organ donation papers as a couple. Like that was one of the most kind of surreal moments where I realized he's actually like critical. Brock was still in ICU. He had skull fractures and just, of course, concussion and just the trauma that he was going through. Wyndham was very severe, and for the first 72 hours, they were pretty confident she would not pull through her injuries. It was just severe with a head injury. And then, of course, Teagan was laying there, and she had had CPR. They think she had cardiac arrest at least 2 different times that they brought her back, and so she was just barely hanging on, but they said, it's all the machines doing all the work. And so when we learned that day that there was another child or some lives that we could save, that was the first moment where God just met us as a couple, because it was like, both of us, let's just do this. Sign it. If we can spare anybody what we're feeling in this moment, let's go. So that early on, you could even sense somehow God is in these hard details right now. And it felt like an easy decision, which is crazy to say that as a parent, but it literally was in that moment.
And at that time, both of our families had arrived from Minnesota, and
lots of support.
Jody's father's a pastor, so I was 3 floors up and couldn't be moved down. So I listened in on the phone to service her dad did.
I did a little bedside memorial.
And Jody asked me, "Do you want me to come up with you?" And I said, "Why don't you just stay with Teagan until she passes?"
And then we just waited for the transplant team to come, and the last thing I did was stood at her bed, put her little hand in mine, and we used to pinky promise. And I just said, I'll pinky promise to love you forever. And what would seem to be the hardest thing, again, there was such a peace in that. And it helped that in the days earlier, she had continually said she wanted to be forever. And I just remember thinking, she somehow got her wish. She went from eating chocolate chip pancakes to boom, like all I could picture was, she's where we all want to be.
Yeah.
And God gave me that in that hard place too. And so we just, said to the transplant team, do what you can, help somebody. And just before the transplant team arrived, Teagan went into cardiac arrest. So they were unable to use her organs. And
well, they did use some of her organs. They weren't able to use
not
her heart.
her
Her heart was
organs.
scheduled
So,
to go to a boy in South Carolina, but the time was too
her
much.
corneas,
And me 3 floors up, I was just kind of sitting there, and
this was the days before FaceTime, cell phones, so he had no idea what was going on in her room. And he was, like you said, a few floors up on heavy medication and just trying to breathe through his injuries.
Yeah. And so I was up there and I sat there, and as sure as I'm talking to you today, I got this feeling Teagan was hugging me and whispering me in my ear telling me everything was going to be all right. About 5 minutes later, Jody came up to tell me that Teagan had passed 5 minutes earlier.
Wow.
And she said I had the biggest smile on my face.
Yeah,
when
my
she
mom
came
was
in.
pushing me in a wheelchair, and she turns the corner to his room, and he was kind of half sitting up, and I thought, his meds must be really working, because his face was kind of shining. I just and I'm of course just weeping, and I could hardly even whisper what had just happened. That she's gone, Teagan's gone, even though we knew it was coming, and we'd even signed that it was going to be okay. But to say that out loud, and he just was grinning, he just said, I know, she just was hugging me from heaven. And that was just another one of those moments. We didn't plan, there was no way that you could have planned that.
Yeah.
And so it was just such a tangible hug from God himself in that moment. I am here in this horrible, horrific thing, and just trust me, trust me with this.
Wow. So obviously you all had to go through this healing journey in the hospital and afterwards and everything. The interesting part about your story is the woman who drove her car into the restaurant was trying to kill herself. And so obviously then there was this court date. So walk us through that.
Well, I think, fairly early on, and this is the one thing, they talk about stages of grief, but there's stages of forgiveness. And we are going through things so differently, her and I. I think fairly early on, I did a phone interview from my bed 2 days afterwards in ICU. I don't know how the news station was able to get through my thing, and they said, what do you have to say to this woman? And I said, tell her I forgive her. And Jody wasn't necessarily in that place that I was at that time. I think some of the things that happened to me in the hospital kind of led me down that path early on. And I think we discussed it as a couple that, as the court date approached, there's nothing we can do about justice. I mean, justice is, and we don't want to be involved with what the other families were thinking, but we said we need to send a message of hope to this person. We need to let them know that they're forgiven, that the Lord wants her in heaven as well. And so I thought Jody gave one of the things Jody said that was very powerful is justice for us isn't seeing her in jail, it's being able to embrace her in heaven.
Wow.
And so we not only forgave her, we encouraged her to seek out a pastor when she was in prison. And
yeah, we hoped she would come out. She had a second chance at life, because at the scene, she didn't really have a scratch on her. And to me, again, the judge could have sentenced her to 100 years and it wasn't going to change anything for us.
Right.
So I would have dreams, or just this sense of, God just saying, imagine that was you. What kind of message would you, clearly this woman is so broken. She's so hurting that she literally had no regard for anyone else.
Wow.
And in that place, all the jail time isn't going to help. It's a heart change. And so I just began to, God, are you really asking me to forgive somebody who isn't even sorry and I don't think even is aware of the pain of what we're going to live with? And it was, I have forgiven you much. And if that was you, I would forgive you. This is the message of Christ and the gospel that you've been raised with all these years. This is your chance to live your faith and show the world something different. And it's pretty incredible when God does kind of speak. He changed my heart, because I wanted to go into that courtroom and just let her have it. And, just add to her wounds. Yeah. And I realized this is what perpetuates some of the pain that the world just continues to do, is when somebody hurt and somebody else is hurt and somebody else, and it's at what point do you just have to let that go? And I think as someone who knows the love of God and what Christ has done for us, it's our responsibility. It's our turn to just say, this grace that's been given to us, it's a gift. And you need it. And we hope that you embrace that, because he says, nothing would give me more joy than to see Teagan standing at the throne of heaven and to stand there with the wounds that Christ bore for all of us, and to just say, there are people here who've heard a message that changed their hearts and lives. And to me, that would just, help the whole story come full circle, but you would see why the things were happening, because that's one of the things you wrestle with the grief and the trauma, and sitting at the hospital, just like every hour feels like, a month or so. And it's just like, what just happened? Like, we were just out for brunch. What just happened to my world? Like, I was pretty happy being a mom of 3 kids. And, our biggest drama was a late fee on a credit card or something in life. Like, what just happened to our world? And to not just get hung up in this why, but just to say, God, if you can use this mess, if you can use our hurts. And he not only changed us and still is in many ways, like he said, through that forgiveness. And for me, it's an ongoing thing since Wyndham has just daily challenges and issues that you have to lay that down and choose. Like, God, I'm trusting just this whole mess to you again and again and again. And at some point, he gives you little glimpses of the beauty of it and the ways he is working. And I know, so the driver, she served ultimately 12 years, I believe, sentence. We've not had contact with her, so I can't tell you where she's at in her life. But still, I just pray for her every day.
Things, and she's still battling some mental illness issues, and for a while disappeared, and they were concerned about her, and there's been some pangs to, do we contact her at some point? But then again, would that do her more harm than good? And and we don't know those answers. We're not smart enough to figure that out.
Yeah. If she was watching tonight, what would you want to tell the woman who drove that car?
I would say, we hope you find peace, or found peace. We hope you've found the Lord. We know you're still struggling, but from our perspective, you're forgiven. And don't struggle with guilt over what happened to us. It's all part of God's plan, and hopefully, God's plan is to have you in heaven as well.
I know so many people are watching tonight, and they're probably looking at your story and saying, I could never do that. I could never walk through that pain and then choose to forgive. How did God meet you in that?
So I think, and there were some things that were coming to me last night and thinking about this. And, I think one of the things that we sometimes lack in sight is that forgiveness. And it's hard. Forgiveness is hard. There's people that do terrible things to other people. Many people watching now may have had some terrible things done to them. And they're carrying around this anger and this hatred and this, and somebody's, saying, I can never forgive that person. And I can't tell you to forgive a person. But what I can tell you is, ask yourself if carrying around this anger and not being able to forgive makes your life more comfortable, better. And I would say if you can't say that, maybe just take a step and pray for the person. Just take and pray for the person and start kind of those steps. And maybe that will lead you to some way of forgiveness down the road, because it's hard. It's hard. And as people of faith, we say a lot of times that Christ can change lives, right? But yet sometimes we condemn people that are maybe a murderer or a child molester or did some other wrong. But if we truly believe Christ can change lives, he's there for those people as well. He can change those people. And his forgiveness is not just for people that do small things. His forgiveness, he didn't take the cross and suffer for somebody that stole, $10 from their workplace. Something minor. He took it for murderers. He took it for child molesters, for rapists. He took it for all who come to him are given that opportunity. And I think as a Christian community, we need to really reach out to those people and really ourselves embrace that message of forgiveness.
Yeah.
If we're going to really live what we say in many ways.
Yeah. So your life obviously looks much different today than I'm sure you ever dreamed. You have 6 children here earthside. And so Wyndham, who was your 6-month-old baby at the time, talk to us a little bit about her and the challenges that she's facing since that accident.
So Wyndham was actually about newborn size when this all happened. And like I said, the doctors did not expect her to survive. She ended up having 2 different brain surgeries, and they told us that we would have ongoing issues with her. She had a shunt placed. And when she was released to us at about 3.5 weeks after the I call it an incident, we just did not know what to expect. And this is 20 years ago. So medicine was quite a bit different, even with brain injuries and just the rehab and therapies going forward. But he and I were just thrilled that she had survived. She looked somewhat, she just looked like our little Wyndham. There wasn't like any facial damage or broken bones or anything. She had all internal injuries to recover from. And we just knew to take it day by day. And she had taken several steps back. So we had to teach her to suck and swallow and like all those things all over again. And at one point, I think we were almost sure that she probably wouldn't live till even age 2. She just like, if she even got a touch of a cold, she would end up in the hospital for a week, or we were in and out of the ER so many times the first 2 years. And of course, seeing specialists and therapists, and we just really came alongside her. And it's just like, what do we do to pull her through here and give her the world? Because she had done nothing wrong. Yeah. She just happened to be in the crossfire, just as we were. That we live in a fallen world, and things happen. Like when they talk about to good people, well, she hadn't even said her first word or sat up yet. And to me, the loss of Teagan was one thing, but I had seen her personality and I got to experience who she was. And to me, it was like, who is this little baby and what can we do to draw her out, like, and give her the world? Yeah. And so that was a big part of what actually kind of pushes you or propels you through your grief as a mom, as a father, to just like, okay, we have been through the worst, but now we have the opportunity to just move forward as far as we can take her, like, just to love her and support her and care for you. So we've been amazed in many ways at how far she's come, and her doctors and therapists, sometimes they use the words miracle with her. She started walking at about age 5 after years of therapy. Wow. And she has exceeded our expectations. She and I know sign language, so I know about 300 signs with her, although she doesn't really use them unless really prompted, but we do have our own little language. And at home, now that we have other children, generally what you do is give her 2 choices and she'll choose. So do you want juice or milk? And she'll point to which end. So she has the understanding of about like a 10-year-old, but she's trapped in an infant body that's less than like a 6-month-old. So she'll wear diapers her whole life. She can't speak. She has a whole lot of anxieties and issues and just all these little quirks that only he and I, we're her full-time caregivers, and nobody else really can step into Wyndham's world. But it's a joy to us. She can find
her way through a computer, no problem. She loves to watch the Power Rangers. Wow. And she has her shows that she likes to watch.
Her favorite SpongeBob lines, I can make her laugh even on some of the hardest days. So it's just been a joy in that regard to just say, God, thank you for sparing her life as hard as it has been, and to watch that, just like she will have a never-ending struggle in her world as a result of nothing that she did on her own. But to just know that even on the mornings when I wake up and it's clear when I enter the room that I'm going to have to do diaper and all this laundry, I have just learned to lay that down and to just not let the anger and the hurt wash over us, but just say, God, I need your grace. So when you ask and say, how do you do this? Because people would say you can't. It's true. You cannot do this on your own.
Wow.
We would not be a couple, I don't think, had we not had God just carrying us through all of these hard things. That sometimes we look back and we're like, that wasn't really so hard, because there was actually blessing in that. Like, to just, like, who would imagine when you finally get a daughter to take her first steps at age 5, that it's literally like winning an Olympic gold medal, you know? So her highs are so much higher. Yeah. And that has, just really given us a lot of joy.
Yeah, in many ways, we can't imagine her any other way, right? This is, it would have been hard for us if Wyndham and Teagan would have been replaced. Let's say, because we knew Teagan her personality was formed. If she had become Wyndham after the accident, suffered Wyndham's type of injuries, it would have been much harder. But with Wyndham, this is who she's always really been to us. Yeah. And it's normal for us. And there are hard days, and sometimes when you get mad at the situation, it's because Wyndham is still suffering from it. Yeah. But you look at blessings from it. Our son Brock is in film school, and one of the things we always did in many ways during those days was put him in front of videos, but not in front of Barney and those type of things. We'd put in, Audrey Hepburn movies and things like. And
he loved Sound of Music. And
yeah,
he was
so-
2 years old. But
Oh my.
literally his play therapist and his pediatrician, so this is all documented, they actually encouraged us to have him watch TV shows or sit in front of a computer because he had such trauma from sitting at a table and suddenly his world turned upside down.
Right.
And as a 2-year-old, if you try and tell him it won't happen again, that's not true because it already did happen. And so they just said he literally can't handle reality. So the best thing, like to get him to eat a meal, he had to stay distracted just to eat like a cup of yogurt and a peanut butter sandwich. And so not knowing that was literally going to shape some of his choices in life. So he loves film and stories, and we're excited to see where God might take him. And who would imagine after all the things he's been through that he just has a whole different worldview. And we just trust that he's walked through a lot of the ugly, hard, and the suffering and the pain of it. But
he
too,
still subconsciously hates to sit at a table and eat.
he'll get up as
He
soon
gets
as
up
he
and
can
he always
take a
gets up
little
and
walk
walks around a little bit during the meal and
So
sits
he
like
has
now.
some of those little quirks and issues, but
Wow.
he just loved Teagan, and we have 4 other children that have been born since the loss of Teagan. And the interesting thing was when we plugged in our due date for Isabella, it was actually the first anniversary when Teagan died. And that was another
Wow.
just one of those goosebump moments where you're saying, God, what are you doing in this whole thing? Because how do you lose one so traumatically after not wanting one, then you get her, then she's gone, and now this is. And so there were just so many big things like that, like down to dates and details where we know God is in the littlest parts of how ugly and horrible and hard this world can be at times. And he's in the big things too. And we're seeing that now 20 years out, that you can kind of look back and say, oh, that's kind of what he was doing or shaping or how it's worked. So Isabella was born 3 days before the anniversary of the tragedy. And it's literally like God gave you joy back. That was the first taste of joy. And literally within a year, how do you go from the most horrific thing to joy? And I can only tell you that it's God. It certainly wasn't me. I wouldn't have chosen that path. I just wanted to pull the curtains and shut myself in. And that was the same year 9/11 had happened. And it felt like the world was just too dark and too heavy. And God is like, I am here. I'm here in this moment. I'm here in this little thing. I am here in little smiles. And the way that we ultimately too kind of found as a couple is to just we can't bear this grief. Like he said, sometimes he's thinking one thing, he's ready to forgive, and I'm just we don't even know if she's sorry yet, and you're just not on the same page. And just saying, God, hold us together, because we hear the statistics and we don't want to be a broken family when we're already broken and shattered. And so just saying, what do we need to pull us through this? What are we going to need? And some days it meant we had one thing, it was a little radio program that they did some giveaways, and we had won the package where you get 12 giant dozen cookies once a week. And we just signed up, and it was the thing that we won. And so we just spent that year giving them to the EMS workers and some of the people who in our communities, in our small group, in our church, and, just our rehab therapists, and just blessing people. And when people are shouldn't we be the ones caring for you? And it was just we are just thrilled to be able to, bring some joy and actually look like we're going to be okay. Because I think the world sometimes doesn't know how to handle something like that, right?
Yeah.
It's so big, it's so hard. It's what this family's, we don't even know what they need. And we didn't know what we needed a lot of times. So to just say, God, we're going to trust you with the healing that we need. And I think that's a hard thing, to be just so open and so willing to just say, God, meet us in this. We just want, most of the time, the guys especially, want to fix things, want to take care of this problem. And you realize this is not something that's going to be a quick fix.
Yeah.
This is something that's probably going to bring us to our knees many times. That's probably going to make us have to ask for help. I don't like to ask for help very often.
Yeah.
And to just trust that God will put the people in your path that need to be in your path. And he will sometimes give you, literally I could open the scriptures and there was something that literally it's he's shouting to your heart right out of that. And before that, as a busy mom of 3 little kids, it could be hard to even find 2 minutes to open your scriptures and get a little something. And it was the first thing you let go. And now it was in my life like, I need something. God, give me something. And so you realize that suffering can drive you to know God's heart, which is something we don't like to do.
Yeah.
But the scriptures even tell you that,
Yeah.
to share in the suffering of Christ. And in this world, you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome this world. And we know, and he likes to say sometimes, 100 years from now, like if we're in the ER with Wyndham all over again, he can look at me and just, 100 years from now, this isn't even going to matter. And it gives you a whole fresh perspective to just say, you're right. Like, okay, we can do this, and why don't you run down to the snack machine, and we'll actually try and make a little date night out of this, right, in the ER.
Yeah, they created a punch card at the ER for us, for frequent visitors.
So we have learned some of those lessons that you cannot learn outside of the school of suffering and pain and heartache and tragedy. And the world would like to tell you, don't go there, don't do that. Like, right? You just want to put the fence around your yard and keep your kids safe and watch their every move. And we were doing that. We had a fenced-in yard. It was like, the trouble is going to meet you in this world. We cannot, and clearly this pandemic is showing us that there are things in this world far beyond all our control.
Right.
And the more you try and hang on to that and just kind of control it, I think that's where sometimes the tension or the anger, the bitterness, or the just, I don't like this. And I've said that 1,000 times, sometimes every year. It's just, I don't even like this, Lord. Is this your ways? He's saying, yes, this is my ways. And even if I don't show you now or give you a glimpse of why, we know that first breath that we take in heaven, it won't even matter. We don't even need the answer because we will have the fullness, and your whole eternity is the cure. And to me, that I believe all sense that, God, you should have asked me to do such, even more. I could have suffered even more when you taste how good that glory is going to be in his presence. And you see what he did for us. Like, what, you did that? Like, did you see how I messed up? Shouldn't I have paid for that? No.
Wow. I know people are watching your story tonight, and I'm sure a lot of mouths are open and tears are flowing as they hear how God has walked you through the deepest pain of your life. And I want to close by asking you one question. I think a lot of times when people observe other people going through pain, their gut reaction is to step back because it feels too much, when really we need to be stepping into others' pain. So what advice would you have for those who are watching others go through pain? How can we best minister to people like you?
I think we're called to be in our walk a community. And again, the pandemic's made it hard to be a community right now. But I think, searching for the people that are in need and not backing away and realizing we are called to this community, and it sometimes is uncomfortable. And that you don't need to have to fix it in order to help people. Sometimes it's good just to listen. And, one of the things I've always said in dealing with grief, there's all these books on the 12 steps of grief. It's different for everybody. The best advice I ever received is just feel how you want to feel. And don't read a book that tells you to go through this. And I'm sure those books have helped people through the process. But that necessarily isn't going to work for everybody. So just as a person of faith, or a person, even if you don't have a faith, just be a person that wants to be in community with people. And feel free to reach out. It's going to fulfill you. It's going to help them, even if you don't have the fix it. And I think as men sometimes we try to fix things. And like when I'm talking with Jody, sometimes I just need to listen to her. When all my instincts say, well, you just do this, this, and this. That's not how it works. Listen and just be in communion with people is probably the best way. And I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, it makes me think of one of the early days that we were home from the hospital, when suddenly the house was so quiet and it was so clean, and I'm on the couch, and of course Wyndham couldn't even do anything for herself, so she's in the car seat, and Brock was watching a video, and I'm thinking, what do I do next? Like, my world had gotten way too quiet, and you just wanted somebody to dump the box of Cheerios out, right, and spill. And so what you think you don't want in life, I like to tell people, sometimes those moments are precious. Those are the things that you will miss. And Chip walked in on me one day when I had the laundry dumped out in the living room and I was folding the basket of whites, and Teagan's days of the week underwear weren't in there. And I was just a flood of tears saying, I can't do this. And I still remember that hug. Like, he knew it was just hard. There was nothing he could say. There was nothing he could do. But just to know, like, I am in this with you. And I think like that, like just the hug, or if you're driving by somebody's house and you know that that family on your street has gone through something hard, or somebody got a diagnosis, a card, a word, a text, a scripture, if you have something, like, people need a lifeline to hang on to, even if it's a thin thread. And I know we think we're going to say and do all the wrong things, but literally, I mean, it's just amazing sometimes what a timely word will do. And I know that we have been able to just honor Teagan's memory. One of the things that had happened was the month before she died, Chip came home late from work from the golf course, and she was still awake because she always had to hug and kiss Daddy, and he would take her upstairs and tuck her in. And so she was waiting late, and he walked in, heads to the refrigerator moments after getting home, pulls out a cold can of Coke. And she looked at him, and I knew she wanted a Coke, and I just thought, she's going to be up all night if she starts drinking a Coke at this hour. And I don't know what made me do it, at least then. I think now I do. So I just said, you know what, if you're doing a Coke, we are getting the malt cup out, we're putting the ice cream in, and you're doing the whole Coke float up. This is going to be a moment, right? We're going to do this. And I took a couple pictures that night, and it was late, not knowing that the little date stamp on there was going to hit me a year later when I'm looking through her pictures. And here it was, literally a month before she died. We couldn't have known how special that moment was. And then I was just struck, and I'm just bawling my eyes out, and he's just like, what is it? And I said, it was a year ago that, you know, you're drinking Coke. Like, again, how did your world change, and how does that happen? And he just said, we can do it again. We can do it. Like, we still have Brock. He would love a Coke float. And I just said, you're right. And so sometimes just the nudge to do something, and I think that's the hard part, is to know, like, when do you nudge somebody going through something so hard? And it depends on how close you are to the situation sometimes, how far to nudge. And I just looked at him and I said, you're right. We're doing the Coke float. Come on, Brock. And of course, he was thrilled. Like, I'm getting a Coke float with Daddy. And the next year we had Isabella born, and it's like, okay. And then as we added more children, we have Ava. She was born 2 years later. And then we've added 2 sons, Crew and Teague, to our mix. And instead of just like this horrible story and these, you know, hard things that we've all lived through, because they live it with Wyndham and watching her grow with disabilities, we had this thing that we could literally, as they grew up, add another one to the mix. And it became our Coke float day, our family Coke float day, where you're just like, listen, on this day, you know, your dad and your sister had a special time, and she would love nothing more than to know that people are getting late night ice cream floats in her honor and memory. And so out of that, and of course the world of social media, and I was blogging, we would start sharing. Our family had a Coke float, and it's in memory of Teagan. We have a picture of it, and then the updated. And now, years later, since he's worked at golf courses, and sometimes Coke float day falls on a day that Daddy's really busy at the club, we have been able to share a Coke float day with hundreds of people.
Wow.
And help families know that the grief and the tragedy and the suffering and the hardships, they're just burdens to bear. But it doesn't mean that there aren't hidden blessings in that, and that something good can't come from your most painful parts of life. And I know people like to say that we're inspiring, and we certainly didn't do it. It was literally out of my pain that I was just like, I can't do this. And he's like, we're just going to do it somehow. And sometimes just making yourself move through the hard things and realize that life still has so much goodness, so much beauty, so much joy. Even in the middle of a pandemic, I know people are finding ways to do that and seeing that. And it's so much a matter of just, for us as people who have a faith and know that this world is not all there is, to just say, we're going to lay it down, and how do we move through these hard things and look for the hope and look for the joy. And sometimes it's prayer. For me, I'll just have to, like, God, give me grace for this day, or I need some joy somewhere.
Yeah.
And honestly, he shows up every time. He shows up. And I think he wants us to know that. I'm right here. I will meet your deepest need. I will even care about the littlest things, the littlest details. But we don't really believe it. You know, it just seems like, oh, that's just a nice verse, or that happened to that character in the Bible. But it's like, He is still the living God over everything. He is over it all. And if you give him even the littlest things, even this, God, I can't change this diaper and find joy and forgiveness, and I need your help. He's like, I'm right here. I will never exhaust what I have to pour back out to you in this thing. And so just to, like I said, just let those little nudges push you forward, and I go back and he goes backwards, and sometimes we both go backwards together, and sometimes one is here and pulling the other one, and it just kind of gets messy. But just knowing there is more to come, and it's not just this world, but something far into the future that we are going to be singing praises, and I can't wait for that.
Wow. You guys, obviously your stories touched me so much, and I know it's touched so many people watching tonight. So thank you so much for allowing God to use you to work through your pain and to just bring hope for so many who are watching. So we're grateful. Thank you so much for being a part.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us this evening, and a special thanks to Chip and Jody for their heartbreaking yet inspiring and hopeful message. We look forward to you joining us in 2 weeks, where we'll be joined by Ruth Cho Simons and Christy Knuckles for Cake and Conversation. If you enjoyed our content this evening and would like to see more of it, I would ask that you consider donating by texting 44321 and entering EDGE 2021 in the message line. Thanks to all of our sponsors for making this possible, and for all of you for joining us. Take care and be well.